The unseen threat. The Zevron starship, Eclipser, glided silently through the cold void of space. Its sleek black hull shimmered faintly against the backdrop of distant stars, a masterpiece of alien engineering. Inside the control room, Captain Drevik stood tall, his pale green skin and glowing yellow eyes marking him as a high-ranking officer of the Galactic Council's most feared military species. The mission was simple: assess humanity's capabilities and report back. The Zevrons had heard rumors that humanity was advancing technologically, but they found the idea laughable. "Prepare for orbit," Captain Drevik commanded, his voice cold and steady. His crew of disciplined officers moved swiftly, pressing glowing symbols on the ship's control panels. He stared at the blue planet ahead on the central display, Earth. It seemed so small, insignificant, a fragile world housing an equally fragile species. "Any signs of defensive installations?" Drevik asked his chief intelligence officer, Lieutenant Mahn. Mahn glanced at the holographic display before him, which showed a scan of the planet. He shook his head. "Negative, Captain. Their orbital presence is minimal. Primitive satellites, low-powered stations, and no significant energy readings that indicate advanced weaponry. It's exactly what we expected. Pathetic." The crew chuckled quietly, confident in their superiority. Humanity, to them, was an undeveloped race that had only recently stumbled into the vastness of the galaxy. Compared to the advanced Zevrons, humans were like infants playing with rocks. "Humans are bold, though," Drevik muttered, more to himself than his crew. "They rejected the Galactic Council's invitation to join. They claim they don't need us. Foolish arrogance." Suddenly, the ship shuddered slightly, breaking Drevik's train of thought. A warning chime echoed through the control room. "Report," he barked, his sharp gaze snapping toward the tactical officer. "Unknown gravitational fluctuations detected ahead, Captain," the officer replied, frowning. "It's strange. The readings are unusually high for this region. It could be a natural anomaly, maybe a rogue asteroid cluster." Drevik narrowed his eyes. An asteroid cluster wouldn't generate this kind of disturbance. "Increase scanner resolution. I want a detailed report." The crew worked quickly, their hands moving over their glowing consoles. Moments later, Mahn's face paled as the readings became clearer. He hesitated, his usually confident demeanor faltering. "Speak, Lieutenant," Drevik snapped, irritated by the delay. "Captain, the source of the disturbance. It's artificial," Mahn said slowly, his voice trembling. "Something enormous is stationed near the outer edges of this system, just past Pluto. It's too large to be a ship." The room fell silent. Drevik's piercing yellow eyes locked onto the holographic display, where a faint, ghostly outline of an object began to take shape. It was massive, easily dwarfing the Eclipser. At first glance, it seemed like a small moon, but closer analysis showed distinct metallic structures, panels, spires, and weapons that glinted faintly under the weak sunlight of the outer system. "Impossible," Drevik whispered, leaning forward. "A structure of that size, built by humans." Mahn nodded hesitantly. "The energy readings match known human technology patterns, but they're on a scale we've never encountered before. Captain, this is not the work of a primitive species." Drevik clenched his fists, his mind racing. Could it be a decoy? A derelict station left over from another species? "Unlikely," Mahn replied. "The power readings are active, and the structure is emitting a faint shield signature. It's operational." The captain straightened, his cold demeanor returning. "Prepare to move closer. We will investigate this anomaly. I refuse to believe humans could construct something like this." "Captain, with respect, if the humans built this, it could be dangerous," Mahn warned. "Perhaps we should inform the council before." "No," Drevik interrupted sharply. "We will not return to the council with half-truths and theories. We are the Zevrons, the pride of the Galactic Council. We do not retreat from mysteries." The Eclipser adjusted its course and began its approach toward the massive object. The closer they came, the clearer the structure became on their displays. It was no ordinary station or ship, it was a fortress. Gigantic cannons and missile bays lined its surface, and its hull was layered with an armor so thick that their scans struggled to penetrate it. By the stars, one of the crew muttered under their breath, unable to hide their shock. Silence. Dravik snapped, though even he felt a pang of unease. He masked it well, standing tall and authoritative. Open a communication channel to the structure. Let's see if this human marvel dares to respond. The communications officer worked swiftly, sending out a standard diplomatic signal. For a long moment, there was nothing but static. Then, a deep, commanding voice echoed through the Eclipser's speakers. "You are approaching restricted human space," the voice declared, calm but firm. "Identify yourselves immediately." The crew froze. Dravik felt his heart skip a beat. The voice wasn't panicked or defensive. It was confident, as though the humans had no fear of the mighty Zevrons. "This is Captain Dravik of the Zevron starship Eclipser," he replied, his voice steady. "We are here on a peaceful mission of observation. We mean no harm." There was a pause, and then the voice replied, colder this time. "Observation. Very well. Observe carefully, Captain Dravik. You have no idea what you stepped into." The communication cut off abruptly, and alarms blared as the Eclipser's sensors detected a surge of energy from the colossal structure. The Zevrons braced themselves as their ship began to shudder again. "What's happening?" Dravik shouted. "Captain, the structure is locking onto us." Marn yelled, panic creeping into his voice. "They're powering up, something massive." Dravik gritted his teeth, his earlier confidence crumbling. He stared at the massive structure on the screen, realizing for the first time that humanity might not be the weaklings they had believed. Instead, they might be something far more dangerous. The mysterious disruption. The Eclipser trembled as its systems struggled to process the energy surge coming from the massive human structure. The air in the control room was tense, the usual calm efficiency of the Zevron crew replaced with murmurs of confusion and unease. "Status report," Captain Dravik barked, gripping the edge of his command console. Marn's fingers flew over his console, his eyes scanning the data streaming across his screen. "Captain, the structure is emitting a gravitational field. No, multiple fields. They're overlapping and creating interference in our systems. I've never seen anything like this." Dravik's patience was thinning. "Enough with what you haven't seen. Focus. Can you stabilize our ship?" "I'm trying," Marn stammered. "But whatever they're using is overwhelming our compensators. If they increase the field's intensity, we might lose control completely." The tactical officer cut in, her voice sharper than usual. "Captain, their weapons systems are also coming online. It's not just a defensive posture. They're aiming directly at us." Dravik's mind raced. This wasn't the behavior of a weak or naive species. The humans knew the Eclipser was a Zevron ship, yet they were treating it like a threat. It was a bold move, almost suicidal, unless they truly believed they held the upper hand. "Open a channel to the structure," Dravik ordered, his voice calm but steely. The communications officer hesitated before nodding. "Channel open, Captain." "This is Captain Dravik of the Galactic Council vessel Eclipser," he said, his tone commanding. "We are not your enemies. Deactivate your systems immediately, or you will face retaliation." The response came almost instantly, the same deep voice that had addressed them earlier. "Retaliation," the voice echoed, with a note of amusement. "Captain, if we wanted you destroyed, you'd already be debris. Consider this your final warning. Withdraw from this sector." Dravik's jaw tightened. The arrogance in the human's tone was infuriating. He gestured to his crew to cut the transmission. The channel closed, and the control room fell silent except for the hum of the ship's struggling systems. "Captain, they're bluffing," the tactical officer said, though her voice lacked conviction. "There's no way they have the capability to take down a Zevron warship." Dravik's yellow eyes narrowed. "Bluffing or not, I won't be ordered around by a species that barely knows how to navigate the stars. Bring us closer. I want a full scan of that structure." The tactical officer hesitated. "Captain, if we approach any further—" "Do it," Dravik snapped. The Eclipser adjusted its trajectory, inching closer to the massive human structure. As they approached, the full scale of the object became clear. It wasn't just large, it was gargantuan. Entire Zevran cities could fit within its hull. The surface was a complex web of metallic plates, glowing conduits, and pulsating nodes that seemed to hum with energy. Weapons emplacements bristled along its edges, some of them larger than the Eclipser itself. Marn's voice broke the uneasy silence. "Captain, the gravitational field is increasing as we approach. It's adapting to our movements." "Adapting," Dravik repeated, a rare flicker of doubt crossing his face. "Yes, Captain. It's as though the structure is alive, or at least controlled by something far beyond conventional A. Every system is perfectly synchronized, like it's anticipating our actions." The Eclipser shuddered again, more violently this time. Lights flickered in the control room, and the crew exchanged nervous glances. "Captain," the engineering officer called out, "the gravitational distortions are causing a feedback loop in our core. If this continues, our engines could fail." Dravik clenched his fists. This was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance mission, a chance to confirm humanity's inferiority. Instead, he was facing an enigma that defied logic. Still, he refused to show weakness. "Deployed probes," he commanded. "I want detailed scans of that structure. If they want to intimidate us, we'll show them we don't scare easily." The tactical officer launched the probes, small spherical drones designed to collect data even in hostile conditions. The crew watched the display as the probes zipped toward the human structure, weaving through the gravitational distortions with difficulty. For a brief moment, it seemed the probes might succeed. Then, one by one, the probes disappeared. "They've been neutralized," the tactical officer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No explosions, no visible weapons fire. It's like they were erased." Dravik's stomach churned, though his expression remained stoic. Could it be a cloaking field? Marn shook his head. "No, Captain, this is something far more advanced. It's as if the probes were absorbed into the structure itself." "Enough of this," Dravik growled. "Arm the weapons. If they won't let us observe, we'll force them to." The tactical officer hesitated, her fingers hovering over the controls. "Captain, if we fire, they'll retaliate. Their weapon systems are far larger than anything we've encountered." "Do as I command," Dravik barked. Reluctantly, the tactical officer armed the Eclipser's primary cannons. The ship's systems groaned under the strain of the gravitational field, but the targeting systems locked onto the human structure. Dravik felt a flicker of satisfaction. The Zevrans would remind humanity of their place in the galaxy. But before the weapons could fire, the Eclipser lurched violently. Alarms blared as the ship's power levels plummeted. The crew scrambled to stabilize the systems, their usual discipline replaced with chaos. "Captain, we've lost control," Marn shouted. "The structure is emitting an electromagnetic pulse. It's overriding our systems." On the main display, the human structure loomed larger than ever, its surface glowing with an ominous light. Dravik's confidence was slipping, replaced by a growing sense of dread. "Captain," Marn said, his voice shaking, "I don't think we're the hunters here. We're the prey." Dravik stared at the massive structure, his mind racing for a solution. For the first time in his career, he faced the possibility of defeat, not from a superior species, but from a race the Zevrans had dismissed as insignificant. The first glimpse. The Eclipser hung motionless in the void, its systems crippled by the overwhelming electromagnetic interference. The crew scrambled to regain control, their usually sharp precision dulled by the growing realization that they were outmatched. "Captain, propulsion is offline," the engineering officer reported, her voice strained. "Shields are fluctuating, and the targeting array is completely non-responsive." Dravik stood at the center of the chaos, his mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, but his pride refused to bow to a species he considered inferior. Is there any way to bypass their interference? Maan shook his head, beads of sweat glistening on his green forehead. "Negative, Captain. It's not just interference, it's a complete systems override. Whatever technology they're using, it's far beyond our understanding." The tactical officer, her face pale, added, "Captain, they're making no further moves. Their weapons are still online, but they're not firing. It's as if they're waiting." Dravik frowned. Waiting for what? Humans weren't known for their restraint in the face of conflict. They were brash, impulsive creatures. Yet, here they were, holding their fire, toying with their superior opponents like a predator playing with its prey. "Open a visual feed," Dravik ordered, his voice firm despite the sinking feeling in his chest. The holographic display shifted, revealing the massive human structure in stark detail. The crew gasped audibly. Up close, it was even more imposing. The outer hull was a mosaic of alien alloys and energy conduits, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic light that resembled a heartbeat. Enormous gun batteries lined the edges, their barrels pointed directly at the Eclipser, ready to unleash destruction at a moment's notice. But what truly unsettled the crew was the sheer scale. The human vessel dwarfed their flagship by a factor of 10, its shadow stretching across the darkness like an eclipse. For a moment, even the ever-confident Captain Dravik was at a loss for words. "It's not a ship," Maan whispered, breaking the silence. "It's a fortress, a mobile fortress." Dravik's eyes narrowed. He hated the awe in his lieutenant's voice. Awe was weakness. "It's impressive, I'll admit," he said coldly, masking his own unease. "But size alone doesn't win battles. It's a scare tactic, nothing more." Before anyone could respond, the holographic display flickered. The human structure was broadcasting an image directly to the Eclipser's main screen. A human appeared, seated in what looked like a command chair. The figure was clad in a dark uniform, adorned with insignias that were unfamiliar to the Zevrans. His face was calm, but his piercing eyes carried an intensity that made Dravik's stomach churn. "This is Commander Elias Ward of the United Earth Fleet," the human said, his voice steady and measured. "You are trespassing in restricted space. Explain your presence." Dravik straightened, refusing to let the human see any sign of intimidation. "This is Captain Dravik of the Zevron vessel Eclipser. We are here on a peaceful mission to observe and evaluate your species' capabilities. Your hostile actions are unwarranted." Commander Ward raised an eyebrow. "Peaceful observation? By disabling our probes, violating our space, and locking weapons on one of our installations. An interesting definition of peaceful." Dravik's jaw tightened. "We acted in response to your unprovoked aggression. Lower your weapons, and we will discuss this matter civilly." Ward leaned forward slightly, his expression hardening. "Captain Dravik, this isn't a negotiation. You've crossed into sovereign territory uninvited, and you're fortunate we haven't destroyed your ship. I suggest you reconsider your tone." The room fell silent. The crew looked to Dravik, their usual confidence in his leadership wavering. He could feel their doubt, their fear, and it only fueled his growing frustration. "You overestimate your position, Commander," Dravik said, forcing a smirk. "The Zevrans are the most advanced species in the galaxy. Your oversized toy may impress your kind, but it won't." Before he could finish, a low hum filled the control room. On the display, the human structure began to shift. Massive panels along its surface slid apart, revealing rows of glowing orbs, warheads, each one radiating an energy signature far beyond anything the Zevrans had encountered. Maan's voice broke the stunned silence. "Captain, Those are fusion-class warheads. Hundreds of them. Dravik's smirk faded as the realization hit him. One of those warheads could obliterate the Eclipser. Hundreds of them. It was overkill on a scale he couldn't fathom. Let me be clear, Ward continued, his tone icy. This isn't a show of power. It's a demonstration of restraint. You're alive because we allowed it. Now, you have one chance to leave. Dravik clenched his fists. He hated the humans' calm superiority, hated the way his crew seemed to shrink under the weight of the situation. But he couldn't ignore the reality staring him in the face. The Zevrons were outmatched, and any attempt to fight would end in annihilation. Prepared to retreat, Dravik said through gritted teeth, his voice barely above a whisper. Marn hesitated. Captain, are you? Do it. Dravik snapped, his pride burning like acid in his chest. The crew moved swiftly, their relief palpable. As the Eclipser slowly backed away, the human structure remained motionless, its weapons still locked onto the retreating ship. You made the right choice, Ward said, his expression softening slightly. But remember this, humanity doesn't seek conflict, but we will not be underestimated. Next time there won't be a warning. The transmission ended, leaving the Zevrons in stunned silence. Dravik sank into his chair, his pride shattered. He had come to Earth's system expecting to find a weak, insignificant species. Instead, he had encountered a force that challenged everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. And for the first time in his life, Captain Dravik felt fear, a show of power. As the Eclipser began its slow retreat, the control room was cloaked in a tense silence. The crew worked quietly, avoiding eye contact with Captain Dravik, who sat rigid in his command chair. The sting of humiliation hung heavy in the air, and no one dared speak it aloud. Distance from the human structure. Dravik finally asked, his voice low and clipped. Marn hesitated, then replied, still within their weapons range, Captain, approximately 15,000 units and increasing. Dravik nodded but said nothing. His thoughts were a whirlwind of anger and confusion. How had humanity, primitive, chaotic humanity, created something so advanced? The Galactic Council had dismissed them as barely more than savages, yet here they were, holding a Zevron warship at their mercy. Captain, the tactical officer interrupted, her voice sharp. The structure is powering up again. Dravik's head snapped up. What now? On the main display, the human fortress seemed to come alive. Massive panels on its surface opened to reveal more weapon emplacements, including colossal cannons that began to glow with an ominous blue light. The energy readings were off the charts. They're not firing at us, Marn said, his voice shaking. They're targeting the nearby asteroid field. The crew watched in stunned silence as the fortress unleashed its firepower. The cannons roared silently in the vacuum of space, their blasts tearing through the asteroid field like a hot knife through butter. Massive chunks of rock were vaporized instantly, leaving behind shimmering clouds of dust and debris. Smaller fragments hurtled away at incredible speeds, some colliding with each other in dazzling explosions. The display's tactical overlay calculated the devastation in real time. Within seconds, an entire sector of the asteroid field had been obliterated, leaving a gaping void where once there had been a dense cluster of celestial bodies. Dravik's hands tightened into fists. The message was clear. This was no random show of force. It was a carefully calculated demonstration designed to leave no doubt about humanity's capabilities. Captain, the tactical officer said, her voice barely above a whisper, if they had fired that at us. They didn't, Dravik interrupted sharply, and they won't. This is a bluff. Is it? Marn asked, his tone uncharacteristically bold. That wasn't just firepower, Captain. That was precision. They knew exactly how much force to use, exactly where to aim. This isn't a bluff, it's a warning. Dravik glared at his lieutenant, but he couldn't deny the truth in his words. The fortress's attack had been surgical, a display of mastery that even the Zevrons couldn't match. It was a chilling reminder that humanity wasn't just advanced, they were dangerous. The tactical officer cleared her throat. "Captain, we're receiving another transmission. It's the human commander." Dravik's jaw tightened. On screen, Commander Ward's face appeared once more, calm and composed. His surroundings were dimly lit, the faint hum of advanced technology audible even through the transmission. "Captain Dravik," Ward said, his tone formal but firm. "I trust our demonstration was sufficient." Dravik's yellow eyes narrowed. "You've made your point human, but don't mistake restraint for superiority. The Zevrons are not so easily intimidated." Ward's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Intimidation isn't the goal, Captain. Understanding is. You came here uninvited, underestimated us, and left yourself vulnerable. Let this be a lesson. Humanity has evolved, and if you or your kind ever attempt to exploit or threaten us, the consequences will be far more severe." Dravik bristled at the human's audacity. "You assume much, Commander. The Galactic Council will not take kindly to this spectacle." Ward leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "Then let the Council know what you've seen here. Let them understand that the era of humanity's insignificance is over. We won't seek out war, Captain, but we'll be ready if it comes." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the Zevron crew in stunned silence. The human structure loomed on the display, its weapons still glowing faintly, as if daring them to make a move. "Captain," Maan said cautiously, "orders." Dravik hesitated. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to retaliate, to prove the Zevrons' dominance. But deep down, he knew it would be suicide. The Eclipser was outclassed in every conceivable way. "Continue retreating," he said through gritted teeth, "but maintain surveillance. I want every detail of that structure recorded." As the Eclipser pulled further away, the human fortress remained stationary, its silent presence an unspoken declaration of power. The Zevrons had come to Earth's system expecting to find a weak, undeveloped species. Instead, they had encountered a force that could challenge even the most powerful empires in the galaxy. Dravik stared at the massive structure on the display, his pride battered but not broken. This wasn't over. Humanity might have won this encounter, but the Zevrons didn't retreat forever. Sooner or later, they would return with a fleet, with reinforcements, with the full might of the Galactic Council. And when that day came, Dravik vowed, the humans would learn what it meant to defy the Zevrons. Diplomacy under pressure. The Eclipser drifted further away from the massive human fortress, but the tension on board was far from easing. The crew moved with subdued urgency, their usual confidence replaced with a quiet unease. Captain Dravik sat in his command chair, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the colossal structure. Every pulse of light from its hull felt like a taunt. "Captain," Maan said hesitantly, breaking the silence. "We've recorded every detail of the structure we could, but the more I analyze it, the less sense it makes." Dravik's gaze shifted to his lieutenant. "Explain." "It's not just their weapons, Captain," Maan replied, his fingers dancing over his console. "Their energy systems are impossible. The power output is equivalent to a small star, yet the structure remains stable. No species we know of has mastered energy manipulation on this scale, not even the Galactic Council." Dravik frowned. "And you're sure it's human?" "Absolutely," Maan said. "The energy signatures, the materials, they match what we know of human technology. But the sophistication, it's as if they've leaped ahead by centuries." Dravik's claws tapped rhythmically on the armrest of his chair. This wasn't just an anomaly. It was a threat to everything the Zevrons believed about their place in the galaxy, and the Council would demand answers. "Captain," the tactical officer interrupted, her voice tinged with urgency. "We're receiving a new transmission. This time, it's not from the human commander. It's from Earth itself." Dravik's eyes narrowed. "Earth on screen." The main display flickered, and the image of a human woman appeared. Her features were sharp, her gaze piercing. She wore a formal uniform, adorned with symbols that seemed both archaic and modern. Behind her, the seal of the United Earth government loomed, an emblem of a planet now united under one banner. "This is Director Liana Kane of the United Earth Council," the woman said, her voice calm but commanding. "Captain Dravik, your vessel has violated our sovereign space and endangered our citizens. Under interstellar law, this constitutes an act of aggression." Dravik bristled at her tone. "We are not aggressors, Director," he replied, forcing civility into his voice. "Our mission is one of observation. Your excessive response is unwarranted." "Excessive?" Kane repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You entered restricted space, armed your weapons, and attempted to probe our defenses. That's not observation, it's provocation." Dravik leaned forward, his frustration boiling over. "You misunderstand our intentions. We are representatives of the Galactic Council, the governing body of this galaxy. Humanity's refusal to join has raised concerns. We were sent to ensure your development does not pose a threat." Kane's expression hardened. "And now that you've seen our capabilities, I trust your concerns have been addressed." Dravik's yellow eyes glinted with defiance. "Your capabilities are impressive, but they do not intimidate us. The Council will not tolerate rogue species wielding unchecked power." Kane's gaze remained steady. "Captain, humanity has never sought conflict with the Galactic Council. We prefer peace, but we will not sacrifice our sovereignty. Your presence here proves that the Council underestimates us. Perhaps it's time for that to change." Dravik opened his mouth to retort, but Kane continued, her voice growing colder. "You've seen one of our installations, a fraction of what we are capable of. If the Council wishes to engage in diplomacy, we are open to discussions. But if you or any other vessel violates our space again, we will respond with force." The room fell silent as Kane's words sank in. Dravik could feel the weight of her ultimatum, the unspoken challenge that hung between them. "Director Kane," Dravik said finally, his tone measured, "you may think yourselves powerful, but the Council's reach is vast. Humanity's defiance will not go unnoticed." Kane's lips curved into a faint smile, one that sent a chill down Dravik's spine. "Let them notice," she said. "Humanity is no longer in the shadows, Captain. Tell the Council what you've seen here. Tell them we are ready." The transmission ended, leaving the crew of the Eclipser in stunned silence. Dravik sat back in his chair, his mind racing. This was more than he had anticipated, a species not just surviving, but thriving in defiance of the galaxy's most powerful coalition. "Captain," Marn ventured cautiously, "what are your orders?" Dravik hesitated, his pride and duty warring within him. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold and decisive. "We return to Zevron Prime. The Council must be informed." As the Eclipser turned its engines back toward Zevron space, Dravik couldn't shake the image of Director Kane's steady gaze. Humanity had played their hand boldly, and it had worked. But this was just the beginning. The Galactic Council wouldn't take this lightly. Humanity had issued a challenge, and Dravik knew the response would be swift. But deep down, he couldn't help but wonder, was the Council prepared for what they would face? The hidden fleet. The journey back to Zevron space was marked by an eerie silence aboard the Eclipser. The crew avoided meeting Captain Dravik's gaze, their usual sharp confidence dulled by the encounter with humanity's fortress. Dravik himself remained in his chair, staring at the holographic display of the human structure, which now pulsed like a haunting memory in his mind. As the Eclipser left the range of the massive installation, Marn broke the silence. "Captain, we're clear of the gravitational distortions. Systems are stabilizing." Dravik gave a curt nod. "Good. Set a course for Zevron Prime. Engage full stealth protocols. I want no trace of our presence left behind." The crew busied themselves with the task, their movements mechanical, their minds elsewhere. They had seen something that defied everything they thought they knew about humanity. For a species that the Galactic Council had considered little more than a nuisance, humans had unveiled a level of power and precision that rivaled, even exceeded, some of the Council's finest. "Captain," Maan said hesitantly, "there's something else." Dravik's eyes snapped to his lieutenant. "Speak." Maan swallowed hard. "As we left the vicinity of the human fortress, our long-range scanners picked up additional signatures." Dravik's brow furrowed. "Clarify." Maan hesitated, as if unsure how to phrase what he had seen. "The fortress isn't alone, Captain. There are more of them." The room fell deathly silent. The crew froze, their eyes widening as Maan's words sank in. Dravik rose slowly from his chair, his commanding presence filling the space. "Show me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Maan worked quickly, bringing up the data on the central display. A series of energy signatures appeared, faint but unmistakable. They were scattered throughout the solar system, some near the asteroid belt, others orbiting distant planets. Each one was colossal, rivaling the fortress they had encountered. This can't be right," the tactical officer whispered. "How could they build so many?" Dravik stared at the display, his mind racing. "Are these active installations?" Maan shook his head. "Unknown. They're heavily shielded, but their energy signatures suggest they're operational. And there's more, Captain. The data indicates these structures are mobile." "Mobile?" Dravik repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "You're telling me these fortresses can move?" "Yes," Captain Maan said. "Their energy patterns suggest propulsion systems far beyond anything we've ever seen. If they wanted to, they could relocate their entire fleet within days, maybe hours." Dravik clenched his fists. This wasn't just a defensive strategy, it was an offensive one. Humanity had built not just fortresses, but a fleet of them, capable of striking anywhere in the galaxy. It was a level of strategic mobility that even the Zevrons couldn't match. "Why didn't they use them?" the tactical officer asked, her voice trembling. "If they have this kind of power, why didn't they destroy us?" Dravik's yellow eyes burned with a mix of anger and grudging respect. "Because they didn't need to. That's the message they sent. This is what we can do without lifting a finger." They wanted us to see, to understand the scale of their power. The room fell into a tense silence. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just surviving, they were preparing. For what, no one could say, but it was clear they were no longer content to be ignored or underestimated. "Captain," Maan said carefully, "if the Council learns of this, they'll likely demand immediate action. They won't allow a species like humanity to exist unchecked." Dravik nodded slowly. "You're right. The Council will see this as a threat. But if they move against humanity, they'll find themselves in a war unlike anything they faced before." He turned to face his crew, his expression unreadable. "We will deliver this data to the Council. But understand this, what we've seen today is not just a challenge to our power. It's a glimpse of a new galaxy, one where humanity will no longer be sidelined." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what Dravik meant, but didn't dare voice it. Humanity's rise was inevitable, and their actions today had sent a message not just to the Zevrons, but to the entire Galactic Council. "Captain," the tactical officer said cautiously, "what if the Council decides to strike first?" Dravik's eyes hardened. "Then they'll learn what we already know. Humanity is ready, and they won't be fighting alone." The words hung in the air like a prophecy. As the Eclipser moved further from Earth's system, the crew couldn't shake the image of those massive fortresses, their silent power a testament to humanity's resilience and ingenuity. Dravik returned to his chair, his mind churning with the weight of what lay ahead. He had come to Earth expecting weakness and found strength. He had come seeking control and left with uncertainty. And deep down he knew the galaxy would never be the same. A new respect. The Eclipser approached the hyperlane exit that would take it back to Zevram space, the tension on board palpable. The crew worked in silence, their movements precise but heavy, weighed down by the implications of their mission. Captain Dravik sat at the center of the control room, his sharp eyes scanning the reports scrolling across his console. "Engage the jump drive," he ordered, his voice colder than usual. "Yes, Captain," the navigation officer replied. The ship's engines began to hum, preparing for the transition into faster-than-light travel. But just as the process began, the ship's sensors flared to life, and alarms blared. "Captain," Maan shouted, "we have incoming signatures, multiple vessels, closing fast." The crew snapped to attention, their eyes darting to the central display. Dozens of blips appeared, surrounding the Eclipser. The tension in the room escalated to panic. "Identify," Dravik demanded, rising from his chair. It's them," Maan stammered. "Human vessels. Smaller than the fortress, but still massive. They surrounded us." Dravik's claws dug into the armrest of his chair. "They dare intercept us as we leave." The holographic display shifted, revealing the approaching ships. They were sleek and angular, each bristling with weapons and glowing with the same eerie energy as the fortress. Though smaller than the installation they had encountered earlier, they were still larger than the Eclipser, and their precision movements spoke of advanced coordination. "Captain," the tactical officer said hesitantly, "we're being hailed. It's the human commander." Dravik gritted his teeth. On screen, the face of Commander Elias Ward appeared once more, calm and unreadable. "Captain Dravik," Ward began, his tone as steady as ever. "I see you've enjoyed our hospitality." Dravik narrowed his eyes. "Your actions are provocative, Commander. Surrounding a Zevron vessel is an act of aggression." Ward's lips twitched in a faint smile. "And yet, Captain, you're still here, unharmed. If this were aggression, you wouldn't be speaking to me now." Dravik clenched his fists but said nothing. The human's confidence was maddening, but he couldn't deny the truth of Ward's words. The humans had every advantage, yet they had not attacked. "We could have let you leave unescorted," Ward continued. "But there's one last thing you need to see before you return to your council." The display shifted, and the view changed to show the space behind the human vessels. The crew gasped as a massive fleet emerged from the shadows. Dozens of ships, each the size of small moons, materialized in perfect formation. Their hulls gleamed under the faint starlight, and their weapons' arrays pulsed with energy. Dravik's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a fleet. It was an armada, a force capable of leveling entire systems. The scale of humanity's preparation was staggering. "This is the United Earth Fleet," Ward said, his voice devoid of arrogance, as if he were stating a simple fact. "What you encountered earlier was one of our outer defense stations. What you see now is our readiness to defend our home and our place in the galaxy." The room was silent, the weight of Ward's words settling heavily on the crew. Dravik's mind raced. The Council had warned of humanity's potential, but even their most paranoid estimates had fallen short of this reality. Ward's image returned to the screen. "Captain Dravik, we could have destroyed you. We didn't. Not because we couldn't, but because we choose not to. Humanity doesn't seek war, but we won't run from it either. Tell your council this. If they wish to talk, we will listen. If they wish to fight, we will be ready." Dravik stared at the human commander, his pride battling with the cold logic of the situation. He had to admit it. Humanity was no longer a curiosity or an upstart species. They were a force to be reckoned with, perhaps even the galaxy's next great power. "You've made your point, Commander," Dravik said finally, his voice devoid of its usual bravado. "I will relay your message to the Council." Ward inclined his head. "Good, safe travels, Captain." The transmission ended, and the human ships began to withdraw, their formation precise as they disappeared into the void. The Eclipser was left alone, the silence on board heavier than ever. "Engage the jump drive," Dravik said quietly, sinking back into his chair. As the ship entered hyperspace, the crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had come expecting to confirm humanity's insignificance, but they were leaving with the knowledge that humanity was perhaps the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced, and its greatest enigma. Dravik stared out at the swerving hyperspace tunnel, his thoughts troubled. Humanity had shown restraint, but was it out of morality or strategy? Were they truly as peace-seeking as they claimed, or was this merely the first step in a calculated rise to power? One thing was certain: the Galactic Council would not ignore this. Plans would be made, fleets mobilized, and strategies devised. But deep down, Dravik knew the truth. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for too long, and now they would all face the consequences.